humans are not a political talking point. We're not, like, our identities were not meant to be created and, you know, confused and just manipulated for political purposes.
Welcome to Matters of Soul Importance, where we dive deeply into topics of both earthly and eternal consequence. I'm Roxanne Solonen, faith columnist and features writer for the Forum, author, and speaker. My guest this morning, Patrick Lehe, was introduced to me through a colleague I'd worked with in the area of faith-based marketing. She was part of bringing me on board to a movie junket I attended in 2018, where we previewed the horror movie The Nun in the jungles of Mexico during a thunderstorm. Later, Cheryl began working in marketing for a wine company and asked if I'd be willing to taste test a wine patterned after Our Lady of Fatima and share my impressions of it in an article. That brings us to the summer of 2024. Though she was not able to go to the Eucharistic revival in Indianapolis, when Cheryl learned I'd be there, she thought I'd enjoy meeting her good friend Patrick, who'd also be attending the event. I'm always up for meeting new people, so my traveling partner and I met Patrick for lunch at the Slippery Noodle, the oldest continually operating tavern in Indiana. And the next evening, after the big main event, the Eucharistic procession through the city, Patrick texted that he'd saved us seats toward the front of the stage where Matt Maher would be performing in Lucas Oil Stadium before 55,000 other Catholics. We so appreciated our new friend who'd helped us feel welcomed in his home state and pledged to stay in touch. Patrick has a story worth sharing, especially as we gear up for the month of June, which many in our day have designated Pride Month. Though Patrick never bought into the Pride movement wholesale, he has not been completely alienated from it either, having struggled much of his life with same-sex attraction as a man of faith. Today, we'll walk with Patrick as he shares about those challenges and how he has met them through a growing love for and faith in God and coming to understand his deepest identity, beloved child of God. Just a couple of disclaimers. If you have young children, you might want to listen to this first before sending it through the speaker for all to hear. Because of the subject matter, it does veer into the PG-13 rating range in a few instances, so just be alert to that. Also, this one does get a little longer than most of my episodes. There's a lot to unpack before getting to the meat of things, but stay with it until the end because by the time we reach the last 15 minutes, a lot of really great insights come through, and you won't want to miss them. Well, enough for now. Let me introduce you to Patrick Lehe. Well, welcome, Patrick, to Matters of Soul Importance. I'm so happy to be able to have you as a guest this morning. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. This is awesome. It's a beautiful, sunny day in Southern California, so I think the Lord is shining his light on us.
It's sunny here too, so we've got it going here. Yeah. Well, we've been talking about this. I mean, we started talking about this back in July when we met at the Slippery Noodle in Indianapolis, and I'm so pleased that we finally have made it to the podcast day because we did arrange for this a while ago, but we wanted to have the right timing. And so, like I do with all of my guests, Patrick, I like to kind of start out finding out who the guest is and really always going back into childhood, into the places that grounded you. So if you would like to just kind of start there and tell us a little bit about your childhood and your early faith journey, that's where we'll start.
Yeah, sure. Guess we'll just dive right in.
Yeah.
So born and raised rural Indiana. And I was born in 1989. So I like to put that out there as context for kind of the general atmosphere of the culture when I was growing up. I'm a cradle Catholic, youngest of four, very devout Catholic family. And from a very young age, I just remember feeling kind of like the black sheep, kind of like I didn't belong. And there's obviously a lot of context to unpack around that, which I'm sure we'll get to. But I think the way that faith was a part of my life from a young age. Like with a lot of people who are cradle Catholics and may feel similarly, is it oftentimes felt a little bit forced upon us with no real discussion as to why we believe what we believe. It was, excuse me, Sunday Mass, 7:30 a.m. every Sunday. I grew up on my family owns our own farm business back in Brookston, Indiana. And so, my dad, my uncles were all farmers. And so it was like very much a routine for us, like up before the sun is and, take care of business first and relax later. And in hindsight, a lot of fantastic work ethic that went into that. And I'm so truly grateful for my upbringing. But beyond that, it was a lot of uncertainty. It was just internally in terms of like what I was going through. I definitely was a little more effeminate, a little different from other boys my age. I played sports more out of like obligation. There's probably less than 2,000 people in my hometown. So there weren't a ton of extracurricular types of resources and things for kids to get into besides sports, so I did the sports, I did the things that kind of like every boy and girl my age were just kind of expected to do.
You had to fill that team in that small town. I was in one of those small towns too. Yeah.
Everyone played in every quarter. But I didn't. And so even though I had this, again, it's easy to articulate now than it was back then, but I kind of had this unrest that I never really liked it. But it didn't occur to me that I didn't like it or that I was allowed to like say I didn't like it. It just was, it's just what you do. So I don't resent the way that I grew up. It was probably very similar to, like I said, a lot of people's upbringing, just a very kind of quaint, small town America, kind of lifestyle. And I'm sure, again, we'll get to this a little later on, but now, especially being away for so long, I've really come to appreciate that lifestyle even more of like things just aren't life and death. Like family is the most important thing. And, we recently just lost a family member of mine back in September, and it was really devastating. And it's such a place of comfort to go back to, just the place where you feel like you can let it go and escape the craziness of the real world. So
yeah, were there any good memories of the faith? Like, are there some things you can pick out now that were beautiful memories?
Yeah, if I tried hard enough. No, I say that somewhat jokingly. I mean, again, I don't feel like I understood it very, very well when I was younger. I just saw it as an obligation, and it really wasn't until my mid-20s that I came to see it how I see it now and really started to develop it. That's not to say it was all bad at all. We went through, I think I was like 16 when I went through confirmation, which I'm not sure if that's normal. It seems like that was like young for me back in the day, but there were a lot of like this. I didn't really understand the sacraments. I didn't really fully grasp it. So yeah, it wasn't bad. I think it just was a pure lack of understanding. And on my part, just a lack of really caring that much, honestly. I mean, I was like, oftentimes on like Saturday night, I would want to go stay at a friend's house or like watch scary movies or something. And it was like, well, got to be in bed because we got to be up at 6 a.m. for church. And so it just, a lot of those memories are of that kind of forceful feeling. which again, I can add more context to later on.
Yeah, I was just the youngest of two, but of course, even in that setup, my sister was the dependable one. There was a time where my dad was trying to plant a garden and I was out. I kind of remember this memory. Maybe it's because I was told it, but I was in my trike, like looking at everyone working and just like, I didn't want to do the hard work. I just wanted to like eat the vegetables that came up a couple months later. Like I had a carefree spirit too. And I don't know, I can kind of relate to where you were as the youngest too. There's something to that, and I see that in my own youngest son.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just the birth order has a lot to do with it too, I think. But either way, I imagine, given what you just shared with us, that you were going to be pushing away from that pretty hard once you were out of school, right? I mean, it's like escape the drudgery. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know at what point you ended up in California, but that's a little bit of a ways from Indiana. So what was your pathway then after that?
Yeah, it's definitely was a culture shock for quite a while. So I knew from a very young age I was always interested in creative writing, and when I was really young, I wanted to be an actor, and I knew I had this desire for that kind of creative life from a really young age. But again, because just by the nature of where we grew up, there really wasn't an opportunity to foster those desires and foster those skill sets from a very young age. My high school had a really kind of fledgling theater program, but by the time I was a freshman in high school, it had been disbanded or defunded or whatever. So, the most I think I had in terms of a creative outlet was just like art class, which I was an okay drawer. I didn't really like painting. So English was really kind of my thing. But then Ball State University is in Muncie, Indiana, which is, so I grew up on more of the west side of Indiana, closer to Illinois, and then Muncie is closer to Ohio on the east side. But that's where David Letterman went. So he is very proud of his alma mater, and he donated a big communications, like a very state-of-the-art facility back in like 2008, I think, or 2007. And then I got into their film program and started in 2008. So college is really where I finally like enjoyed learning and enjoyed a classroom setting to where I was like, oh, I can actually pursue what I want here. Like there's all these courses. I get to choose what classes I take. Like it was this very foreign concept. And so college was really where that truly came alive for me. And I learned a lot of the screenwriting and technical filmmaking skills. And then 2012 is when I graduated and moved straight out to LA. So I would say in terms of faith life, in those college years, and certainly in the early year or two in Los Angeles, church was just a non-issue for me. And I say that in kind of the negative way of, I was on my own. I was living on my own. Granted, I wasn't truly independent because I was still relying on my parents for a lot of stuff. But I've kind of felt this, as I'm sure all young people do when they go to college for the first time, is like, freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom. I don't have to listen to my parents and go to church at the crack of dawn every Sunday. And that had changed a little bit even in high school. When I got my license, I was allowed to kind of go to church when I wanted. But it still just felt like everything, like our whole lives were just centered around, you have to go to church. Like it felt a little bit like, I want to be able to speak freely without sounding too dramatic, but so sorry, mom and dad.
Be honest.
But it just felt a little bit like do or die. Like, as long as you make it to church on Sunday, nothing else matters. Or as long as you follow the rules, nothing else matters. So that it was very much rule following. And so another part of my personality that emerged from a fairly young age was I just hated being told what to do. I hated being forced to do things that I didn't want to do. And that didn't just pertain to church. It pertained to, growing up on a farm, every summer we had to work on the farm, and I didn't like that.
Yep.
So even on summer when, most kids were sleeping in or, kind of had somewhat of free reign with their days, I was like, all right, got to go work on the calves and get ready for 4-H. And, but again, that's not to say it was all bad. It's very much part of my upbringing that made me who I am. But
yeah, my husband grew up in a plumbing family, so there are worse things. Maybe you have to get up at the crack of dawn to go fix toilets. I mean,
yes.
but now he is a musician too, though, so he has that creative spark too. And I have a feeling he'd probably identify with some of the things you're saying. And now he works for a plumbing and heating company as a manager and part owner. So he ended up, but he plays his guitar every day. So, I see the interplay there of those two things, the necessary things, and then the free-spirited things that bring life and energy to you. I completely connect with that. I have to have something creative going. So
yeah.
So LA was kind of was that not even a question? It's like, I'm going out to California. That's where it's at. And
yeah. Essentially, I was very lucky. Ball State had a great alumni network. So, I was put in touch with a couple of alumni who were living out here through our internship coordinator, and ended up getting a fantastic internship this summer between my junior and senior year. So I was just here for the summer and then had to go back to graduate, of course. But that was really my first, getting my feet wet in this industry and the city. And so it was a really good way to kind of like test the waters. But then, of course, a year later, is when I fully, 2012, fully packed the bags and made the trip. I had gotten a paid internship with a production company in Santa Monica. So, and oddly, like I was working with a lot of Christians and Catholics in that company, but I still was kind of just going to church out of obligation. I didn't know the true importance of it, and so that's when I would say, in my first 2 years of moving to Los Angeles was when I really had to confront this underlying fear of that same-sex attraction. And so that's kind of where it all kind of wove together in terms of seeking out church again.
I have one question before we start going into that direction. You said were you still going to Mass?
Yes, but I was a little more lackadaisical about it. I was kind of like, admittedly, if I was like hungover or something or too tired, I would just be like, I don't feel like going. And then, of course, I would have that Catholic guilt lingering over my head for several days. But,
yeah. But you were going. I mean, I guess I was even surprised to hear that. Like there was you still had that in you to go. It just still wasn't making a connection. It wasn't. Yeah.
Yes, that's one kind of caveat I should mention is even in all this time, I never really didn't believe in God. It was never like, I think I have had a crisis of faith in my life, but it wasn't until later. But as a young adult, as a teenager, I always believed and I would always defend my faith, but it was more of the practice of it that felt, again, that force. And that was so unappealing to me. So it was kind of this tug of war.
Yeah. One more question about faith. Mm-hmm. What was, if you can recall, like, what was God like for you then? Like, did you consider God a friend? Did you feel his presence? I know I did in college, and I had like some wandering years also, but did you see God as a companion, as someone who was looking out for you? Or what was your view of God?
That's a really, really good question. And the simple answer is I didn't know God at all, because it was, and I still distinctly remember when I did start to know God in a more personal way, but I didn't. And like, again, religion to me was literally just ticking the boxes. It was it was more religion than spirituality. And of course, now in hindsight, I know better, and I'm like, well, you need both. But the concept of spirituality just was not even something I'd ever really been exposed to. So religion was just this kind of like, okay, get in your, lockstep with all the rules and follow along. And so that's why I think it was more something to resent than something to embrace.
Right. I get in college, I did have a Newman Center group that I got involved in, and we had a wonderful priest. And I really think that was what kept me tethered, even though I was still kind of poking around out in the world, So if you didn't really have that during college, I can see how that just part of your life kind of went flat during those years. Other things were exciting you than that. So
totally. Yeah. And I didn't even know what a Newman Center was when I was in college. I mean, there was a great church on campus that I would walk to with friends sometimes, but in terms of getting involved, I didn't even, but as being the youngest, on the flip side, like my oldest sister was very well formed in her faith from a pretty young age. But even for her, I think for all of my siblings, it was, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think for each of us, it was a struggle to find that relationship with God without it feeling just kind of like a rote practice.
Okay. So let's keep going then, because I want to hear about how that changed, and obviously there's still some story before that happened. So what were some of the crisis moments, and you were kind of talking about the same sex attraction too. So where was your soul roiling around at this time?
Oh man, haven't had to dive deep into this for a while, but I love it. It's such an important part of my story. And I hope it can, touch others in important ways. But so yeah, it was, as you can imagine, I was just a small town kid in a big city, didn't know anyone for the first time. I'm 21, which in 2025, 21 sounds like infant to me. And so there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of anxiety. My very first job when I moved here was working for a small talent agency, which if you're not familiar with that, an agency is essentially where actors go to get representation. And then you have an agent who tries to get you jobs and tries to get your face out there and all that. So I was an assistant to this, morally questionable woman who really... It was my first professional job. And so I was confronted with really paralyzing anxiety for the first time in my life. And along with that, like I partied a lot in college. Like I drank a lot. I was still very much harboring this fear surrounding this sexuality that I knew, but I refused to acknowledge. And, I had girlfriends in college and high school, and yet I would still kind of like act a little effeminate. And then I would get called out on it. Like, dude, are you gay? Or, dropping the F-bombs, which I don't mean the curse word. And so this concept of like gay and, I don't know if I'm allowed to say like fag on here, but that's very much a part of what I experienced. And so a lot of these misconceptions about what it means to be gay were very much like thrust upon me in an incredibly negative, disparaging way. I even found out later in life that there was like a rumor, and when I was in high school, that one summer I went to Pray Away the Gay Camp, which which was like so far beyond, like I was always home during the summer. Like I don't know when people thought I would have like disappeared for months on end, but so it was that's a big part of of the context surrounding how I grew up, is this just dark cloud of always being like disparaged for my questionable sexuality and my behavior and my, I was a mama's boy and kind of being called out for being a mama's boy, and especially as the youngest of four, I never developed a voice of my own. And I know that it sounds kind of cliche now looking back, like, to use that kind of dramatic, dramatic vernacular, but it was true. I never understood how to stand up for myself. And so I jump back in time a little bit just to give a little more context to to how I came into my early 20s, moving to a city where, I mean, entering one of the most brutal industries that are it's just like designed to tear you down because, it's so rare that people find long lasting success in Hollywood.
There's a lot of rejection.
Yes. And which is the biggest irony is that a lot of us kind of like artist types who are seeking validation are coming out here for that validation in an industry that is like built to reject you. And so it's like this ultimate conundrum of like, wow, us artists are truly, self-deprecating. So anyway, just to kind of get to the meat and potatoes of it all, I would say it was so I moved here in 2012, and then 2014 was really where I started to take baby steps towards outwardly acknowledging that I might be gay. And just to add to that, like saying the words "I'm gay" felt like literally like poison. Like it was that thought alone caused such crippling, paralyzing fear and shame that I literally thought I would go to the grave never saying those words out loud. Truly. Like, and for a young kid, again, growing up in the 90s, if you can imagine, like a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid having no idea, like there were no resources, there were no podcasts, there were no Roxannes out there, there was no real like definitive literature out there, or even if there was, it certainly wasn't accessible to me. And so, talk about isolation and talk about just feeling, I truly felt like the only person who felt this way, because it felt so, it just felt so impossible. Like a gay person who is also Catholic, like how does that work? And it goes without saying, culture tells you that it is impossible. So we're very much confronted with this, like, okay, on one side, there's one extreme, and on the other side, religion doesn't exist at all. And so there was just obviously so much polarization, and still is to a large degree, but thankfully there are more voices out there now. So anyway, I think I was first confronted with this reality around 2013, 2014. I finally started making a solid group of friends, and again, I'm in Los Angeles for less than 2 years at this point, and even my new friends in LA would kind of like, after a while, kind of question my sexuality. But for the first time in my life, it didn't seem like apocalyptic. It didn't seem like a big deal to them. They were just like, oh, and if you're gay, like it's whatever. And of course I was just like, no, like that, I'm not gay. Like, just very, very, pushing against that, because I feel, again, hindsight's 2020, right? Like at that time, I think I can look back and say it was very much a defense mechanism to avoid criticism and avoid, just this really, again, disparaging kind of criticism of who I was as a person. And so that's, I think, another big reason I never really wanted to say I'm gay, because I didn't feel like a quote unquote gay person as presented to us by culture. I never felt the urge to go, celebrate Pride and go like, whatever the kind of mass media perception of gay was. I didn't fit that. Like, it just wasn't who I was. But yet the culture kind of commandeered the entire definition of what that was. So it was like, well, if I come out as gay, then that's what I am. And that's how people are going to see me. But I also don't have really a place in the church. So I was just like lost. I was just completely at a loss for who I was, where I belonged. So I think that's why coming to a big city where, it is, I mean, it's Los Angeles, again, probably goes without saying. It's very much you do you kind of culture. It's,
right.
Do what makes you happy, no rules, no truly, like, really no morals even. And that just felt good because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to have this iron defense like up around me. And trust me, it takes a lot of energy to keep that defense up. Like, it takes soul sucking energy to just, some people would call it a facade. I certainly felt like I wouldn't say I was living a facade. I would say I just didn't know who I was, and I had no idea how to go about that. So, sorry.
No, I want to jump in with a question. I'm going to take this back a bit because I don't know. I when you mentioned one of your first bosses or whoever you were working with in the agency, and you said she was morally questionable. I had questions about that, so I'm going to bring you back. What did that mean?
Yeah, I guess I should say that probably, especially in modern times, has some different implications than it did in 2012. But it was a lot of like emotional and verbal abuse and manipulation. There was no shortage of being called a dumbass on a daily basis. She created such an environment of fear, and fear at the time I couldn't pinpoint it, but now looking back, it's like I had so much fear naturally within me because of my personal experiences that that year I was working for her was the first year I experienced my first true crippling panic attack. And it was a Sunday night. Of course, partying was nothing new to me because I did it all through college. And so, I had made a couple of new friends. And so that was just the norm. It was like, oh, Friday night, where are we going? We're 21, 22, let's go party. And then that, I guess what kids, I sound so old, quote unquote kids would call it these days, is like the hangxiety or the Sunday blues or the Sunday scaries would really set in because it's just that obviously alcohol is a depressant. So, right. Sunday night, I'm getting anxious about the week to come because I knew I was miserable in this job. And I just remember waking up one morning at like 2 a.m. on a Sunday night going into Monday, heart racing, head just in a complete flurry. I was truly like what they say about panic attacks. It's like a feeling of imminent death is spot on. Like it truly felt like just an imminent death like looming over me. And it was just a matter of minutes or seconds until I was just going to like drop dead. It was, and it was something I'd never felt before. So of course that created more anxiety. And so anyway, ended up calling my mom, and my mom has a lot of experience navigating, anxiety and things like that. And so she really, became like a voice of groundedness and of reason for me during those times. And so that became very much a routine for me, like weekly panic attacks, mostly caused by, self-medicating through, not drugs. I never dabbled in drugs. I'm way too anxiety prone for that. But just a lot of overconsumption of alcohol, definitely became this just really kind of like toxic circular behavior. But you're numbing out all of that, and then yet the next day comes and you have to face it. So that totally makes sense because you're not, exactly. Mm-hmm. And it was like, okay, Friday night, I've just spent a week really like, it was one of those like work environments where you really have to navigate this person's personality because you never know if you're going to get haha jokey boss or like berating finger in your face. Why didn't you do this, boss? And it was just a very chaotic work environment that caused so much external anxiety on top of kind of the internal anxiety I was already feeling.
Well, and the other thing too is you were young and you were trying to figure out who you were, and
yes,
here you were. You made it. You're in LA. You're on your way, and then this
Yeah.
is it. Like
I know.
I'm sure it was a shocker. Like, oh man, that's not where I was expecting this would lead. Right? You thought you were going to be, there was a freedom that you were chasing after. Exactly. And instead you were kind of in chains there in that toxic situation. So I don't mean to like belabor that, but it seemed like that was kind of a key, like a really disruptive moment for you.
Majorly. Mm-hmm. No, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's exactly what it was. It felt like this chain. Even on my lunch break, I remember walking down the street to like Coffee Bean, and I couldn't even enjoy my lunch break because I was like, I knew in 60 minutes I was just going to be right back in that. It was terrible. So,
yeah. So that's all. I mean, that is all a part of like what's going to happen, because it's like now you're carrying that, and that's kind of like a trauma that you had to, that was with you even after you left that place, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. And so, yeah, my timeline's kind of jumping around a bit here, but really, that job and that anxiety that started to really rear its ugly head in that year of working there, that was really the first impetus for me kind of going back to church because, or at least going back more regularly, because amidst all this chaos, amidst this swirling panic and anxiety of, again, what the kids may call adulting, it just became so abundantly clear that like college had not prepared me for the real world. And does it really prepare anyone for the real world? That's probably a big debatable question. Mm-hmm. But it was so scary because I had also obviously chosen to move across the country, going from a town of 1,000 people to, Los Angeles. So church, even though I hadn't figured out my relationship with it, was just the only normal thing that I knew. And it was the only thing that I felt would provide a little bit of solace among what I felt was just this uncontrollable anxiety. And that's what was really at the core of it, was feeling this just loss of control over my life, over my emotions, over my circumstances. And so that was really where church started to become integrated more into my life, because again, it was the only thing I felt that I could bring with me from home, was the routine of going to church. And so again, even though I was still doing it a little bit begrudgingly, I felt like I needed that somehow. And then, luckily I was only in that job for about 10 months. And then, moved on to another job that was not much better, ended up being there for a week, and then, went home for a wedding and ended up not going back to LA. So this anxiety, this panic really came to a head in, I want to say early 2014. And so I stayed home for like a month. I was just like, I was just beside myself. Like, and luckily this is like, again, with home feeling like that comfort zone, my parents were just like, all right, well, I distinctly remember it was church. I flew home Friday night. Saturday was the wedding, and I was flying home Sunday. So it was a really quick turnaround. And I had just started this new job that was like arguably working for even crazier people than my previous boss, or like same amount of crazy, but in kind of a different way. And I was just like, I can't do it. I cannot do it. And so I broke down after church and I was like, Mom, I cannot go back to LA. Like, I need to cancel my flight. I can't do it. And my mom is one of those things where like we go grocery shopping after mass. And I just remember my mom saying, well, I better get an extra gallon of milk if you're staying home.
Well, and you know what? And I was going to ask before too, like what was your parents' reaction to you going to LA? Like, so, and the reason this is coming up now is like, is your mom like inwardly saying, "Oh, good, he's coming back," or I don't know what were they excited for you to leave and go that far away? Hesitant? What was that situation?
My parents were always incredibly supportive, even though the idea of the arts and like, you know, the more creative field and stuff like that was very foreign to them and to me by proxy. They were still supportive of what I wanted to do. So, you know, I would say, you know, 10, 13 years ago, the culture of what things are now are not quite as extreme. So they didn't like that I was moving so far away, but they knew that's what I had wanted to do my entire life. So they supported it and they helped me move out here and they were great. But then also, you know, my mom, again, has a lot of sympathy for this kind of like mental, I don't want to say mental illness. It's like such a strong word, but in some ways, you know, it was this anxiety, this panic was something that I really, really, really struggled with for years. And despite some of the things I've said earlier in this episode of, you know, some of the more harrowing aspects of my upbringing, I did feel supported, even though, you know, I didn't always have like the healthiest or most productive kind of resources at hand, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then the other thought before we go to break is I sense a bit of a turning point here where for the first time, church is something you've discovered that maybe you actually need. There was a need there. You said the word need. And even though it wasn't a full on embrace yet, suddenly there was a piece there that the world could not give you. And yes. It was still a little bit out of touch, but that's going to be part of where we're going to go on the other side of the break. And also, I want to hear more about your relationships and kind of how that all was coming together. So let's take a short break here, and we will be back with Patrick Lehe, who is answering the question, was I born this way? One man's search for truth. We haven't even gotten really to that question yet, but we will. So stay tuned after this break.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome back to Matters of Soul Importance. We're talking this morning with Patrick Lehe. Sorry, Patrick. That's a family name for us, so I shouldn't have flubbed that one. We have a lot of Patricks in my family.
Oh, great.
So, yeah, but we want to hear a little bit more. We're going forward and hearing about your journey of like kind of the faith crisis, also identity crisis, and eventually those two will merge together as you go along. But I did want to hear about your relationships a little bit because we're kind of hearing about you and what you're going through. I think you said you had girlfriends in high school. Did I mishear that?
Nope. That's correct.
Yeah. And share a little bit about that. I'm curious, like, did that seem natural or did it seem foreign? I'm just trying to understand, you know, as we move forward into this, like, where were you at in terms of thinking about maybe life someday, marriage, you know, what was going through your head and heart during those years of trying to figure out who you were?
Yeah, man, I hope we have like 3 hours because these are really, really great questions.
I just took you into the deep end. I know.
No, it's great. I love it. I'm like, let's go. And that's the thing is like, in terms of vocation, in terms of a calling, I feel like my personality is very much like, let's be an open book because I know how harrowing and crippling it is to grow up with such confusing feelings and confusing questions in your mind. And it took me over a decade to get even a semblance of an answer. And so if I can help speed up someone else's journey, I really feel like that's what the Lord's calling me to do in my life in many ways. So yeah, I'm happy to go into the deep end.
Let me jump in. I know I'm ruining your train of thought here, but there's one other question I want to circle back to, and it was when you were in LA, and people were starting to say, "Hey, if you're gay, that's cool. Like, no worries, right?" And that felt good to you, and yet at the same time, you were resisting it too. Like, but I imagine like some people who have the mind of the world today would say, well, the only reason you were confused or at all was because of religion, like that was making you feel that Catholic guilt, otherwise you wouldn't even have been having any kind of a crisis. So that's the problem. I'm just,
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. This is now we're getting into the juicy stuff. This is good. So to answer your first question, yes, like, I think you linked to my friend Michael's Lila Rose episode where he goes very much into more of kind of like the psychological, clinical elements of kind of nature versus nurture of sexuality. And we've been friends for we first met at St. Monica's, which is where was my home parish for a long time when I first moved here. So Michael and I have been good friends for a long time. We share a lot of the same experiences, and he has a very again, he's a therapist, so he has a very clinical understanding. So for that, but that's not kind of the approach I take. I'm very much like, I'm an expert in my own story, and I'm a storyteller by trade. So I try to just come at it from a very fact-based in terms of that's my experience.
Sure.
So anyway, not to get too sidetracked, but if you listen to that episode, one thing Michael says is, it's pretty much, again, I don't want to speak out of turn because I'm not the expert, but it's somewhat of settled science that like sexuality is fluid. Like, so that's the first thing to this "was I born this way" question is like, well, if we accept that sexuality is fluid, then how can someone be born this way? And I have my own take on that, but this is just really to answer the question about relationships is I truly felt attracted to some of these women that I dated in college. And still, I do feel like there was one relationship I had in college where I really did feel a deep love for her. And I could have honestly seen myself having a family. And that's such a loaded question and answer, which I don't want to spend all the time talking about that. But I think the answer is that marriage, the answer is really leads to another question that gets to the bigger issue, which is marriage was always just kind of the expectation, right? Like that was, you grow up, you find someone you love, you marry them, you have kids, and that is what life is about. Like that's, and to a large degree, that's, depending who you ask, that's still kind of a big expectation in our culture, is that you're either, in terms of the two extremes, like the two extreme vocations, is like you're either a priest or a nun, or you get married and have a family. And that's a dichotomy that part of my answer to this grander question, what it seeks to kind of deconstruct a little bit. Because I think while the whole reason that relationship in college ended was because I moved to Los Angeles and she stayed in Indiana. And, in hindsight, I can't say for sure if we would have gotten married. I think the journey I've been on for the last 13 years is very much a journey I had to go on before I could fully commit to another person anyway, because there's just so much of what my old therapist used to call my suitcase to unpack. So that's the answer to that, is like, I do believe sexuality is fluid. I did sincerely have these feelings for these females I was dating. However, there was so much unrest because I knew I had a sexual attraction to some men, not all men, but some men. And I knew that was like not, I want to be precious with how I talk about it now, because I don't want anyone to feel like I'm coming at them with any sort of judgment or criticism. I have the utmost compassion for everyone struggling with this, regardless of where you are in your journey, whether you're ready to talk about it or it's something you're struggling with on your own. That is, it sinks my chest just thinking about it, because suffering through this on your own is like the just most horrible place you could be. But I think I was not in a place where I was ready to commit to a long-term relationship because I had these lingering questions. So again, to jump forward a little bit to Los Angeles, it was, I think, 2014 when, I was living with a couple of roommates who are to this day a couple of still my best friends in the world. And I just one day decided, like, I had been on some of the dating apps and had been on a few dates with girls. And then, I don't know, I guess it had just been several months of like thinking and admittedly kind of maybe like desensitizing myself a little bit. And it was fall of 2014. I took the plunge, as scary as it was, and I swapped my interest in the dating app from women to men. And it was scary at first. I think I was just, even though in my heart I was like, okay, but Catholicism says this is wrong, but it's something I'm feeling like. And I think there was just it was mostly fueled by this curiosity of kind of like, what am I missing out on and what is there to experience? Because you have to remember, in the grand scheme of things, this was just all in all a very transformative time in my life, not just personally or through sexuality, but professionally. I was in a new city, starting a new career, all these things. So in a way, all of these major changes were shifting in my life at one time, and it got really confusing. So the way I kind of justified going on that first date with a guy in my mind was kind of, oh, well, I don't have to treat it as a date. It'll just be like networking. It's like going to get drinks with a friend. And so pursued that and met this person who I thought was like pretty great. Again, what I learned very quickly is that in the gay culture, there's very much, at least I can speak from the male side. I'm not sure. I obviously can't speak confidently to the female side of things, but for men, there's very much kind of a gradient in terms of where you are in your journey. So for me, this was my first time ever stepping into this experience. Whereas other men, it's like, nope, they've been out and proud their entire lives. This is nothing new to them. And so that's one thing in gay culture is you kind of have to gauge where the other person is at in their quote unquote coming out journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, I just say this because I was very new to it, but I felt myself very early on emotionally latching on to this other person. And I was still, believe it or not, I was still like very forthcoming about my religion. I was like, yeah, look, I'm Catholic. This is like part of who I am. And I would get these looks of like, wait, what? And so I would say these things, but I was still, like you said, in this kind of identity crisis where I didn't really know what I meant by that. Like, sure, I'm Catholic, but I'm sitting here on technically a date with a guy, and how am I reconciling that? So this is where things really took a turn. So this person became, We went out a couple of times. It was literally nothing, didn't like go beyond anything other than just like friendliness. But emotionally, I found myself in this state where I was like waiting for a text. I was just waiting for, kind of typical what all men and women do to some degree is like, especially with online dating, it's like, oh my gosh, like my happiness depended on if I got a text back from this person, and always just like wondering, where are they? What are they doing? And it's like my mind became consumed with this other person.
It's almost like an addiction, right? To
Yes.
a drug or something. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was this like, my ebbs and flows of happiness were completely dependent on whether this person gave me the time of day or not. And that was a very, very, very unhealthy place to be. And I'm very grateful because I feel like, again, God's timing is perfect and everything. And I just feel like somewhere along the lines of how I was raised and my younger life experiences making me who I was, made me the type of person who could go into a little bit of self-reflection like that and say, whoa, I'm letting this person control my emotions. That's not normal. I need to, and I'm very much like, if I'm in a state of disarray or anxiety, I want to solve it. I want to answer the question. I want to understand what's going on, and I want to solve it, and I want to move on because I cannot exist in that chaotic state. So sorry, I know there's a lot more to get to, so I want to kind of like expedite this story a little bit.
No, it's important though. I mean, and honestly, it really does help to hear some of that depth because it's not my experience. It's not a lot of people's experience, but we know that it is an experience that people have. And really at the root of it, Patrick, is a relationship and connection and wanting to be accepted and loved and appreciated. And I mean, those are all things we all experience. So
absolutely.
In that way, we can relate.
Totally. And that's something that I think is really, in these last few minutes or however long we have, like, that's where it's all going to really come together. So I want to make sure we really dive into that. But so essentially it was 2014, and this, I guess what you would call a situationship, kind of crumbled. And this guy was like, hey, like, I don't know where you're at with all this, but I don't see it working out. Like, I think we should just be friends. And of course I was devastated, but that was a turning point for me because I was not only faced with this first really big rejection, but I was forced to kind of face the sexuality for the first time head on, which sounds kind of funny because it's like I had just been quote unquote dating this person. But I finally was like, I need spiritual guidance on this, because that's the thing. I'm still calling myself Catholic, but I'm doing this, and like, what does it all mean? I was so confused. So I remember it was, I think, Christmas of 2014. I went to reconciliation, it's not just out of, habit of what you do right before, the holidays. And for the first time in my life, I opened up to my priest about, I think I've just felt for my whole life that I'm gay. And Father Richard just changed my life. He was amazing. And he really helped me. That's when, to answer your question from earlier on, he was the one who really helped me start to see my faith as a relationship with Christ, as the spiritual side, not just go to church, get nothing out of it, and it's just an obligation. It was just this really mind-opening and soul-opening experience of God, like, loves me. Like, God, I think it's so easy to look at the catechism, look at the words on the page, and that says being gay is wrong, which is a complete misinterpretation, I might add, which we can talk about. But it's so easy to look at the rules, quote unquote, and say, oh, God hates me because he made these rules. Well, there's so much more nuance. God loves all of us. And that was another concept. I guess maybe for the sake of time, I guess this is a good time to kind of dive into some of my more recent explorations of where I'm at kind of now with all of it.
Mm-hmm. Can I, I'm going to ask you one question.
Yeah, please.
What did Father Richards, is that what it was?
Father Richard. Yeah.
Richard. Do you remember anything specific? Like, was there a phrase or something that you remember from that conversation? And maybe not.
Oh,
yeah. Something
Absolutely.
that just like kind of was like mind blowing or just like that bombshell.
Honestly, that's what it was. It was as simple as it was. And even at the time, it didn't feel like a bombshell because it took me so long to understand what it meant. He said, I think what you need, Patrick, is to look at religion as a relationship with Christ and not just ticking the boxes. And that, again, in that moment, that was so foreign to me. I was like, relationship with Christ. What does that even mean?
It's like another door, like this door opened up like Oz, right? Like everything's, maybe you're not in the door yet, but there's like this whole other, it's colorful. It's, there's a whole other dimension over there that you hadn't even tapped into.
Totally. Like that's a really good way to put it, because again, speaking to that isolation, it's like, just to recap really quick, I felt like I was the only person in the world who felt like this. Like, how could a Christian and a gay person exist in the same thing? Like, it's such a dichotomy because of how the culture has built that up. And then to open up. So, okay, most importantly, and for hopefully listeners out there who might not have heard of it, the biggest, beyond that phrase, Father Richard introduced me to an amazing film, a documentary called The Desire of the Everlasting Hills. And I don't know, have you seen it, Roxanne? Have you heard of this?
Yes. Yeah. I think we talked about it at the, I don't expect you to remember, but yeah, I'll put that in the show notes too, because phenomenal. Yeah. I watched it a couple times. But.
It's incredible. It's like a 60-minute doc. And this is a really good example of how I think Christians need to work harder at first of all, understanding this issue, and second of all, evangelizing about it. Because at this point, I was 25. I suffered for 25 years having no idea who I was. And then little did I know, there were these people openly talking about their experiences with this exact same thing that I had been feeling. It's like,
and just to recap, Desire of the Everlasting Hills, it's a documentary of 3 individuals who had experienced same-sex attraction and that same dichotomy with the church. They were all Catholic originally and kind of had walked away and gone into that lifestyle full-fledged and then found their way back. And I know some people will right away say, well, question that last part of coming back. But it really is beautiful. And what it did for me is just, again, brought me into the reality that everyone wants to be loved. Everyone wants relationship. Everyone deserves that. Like, we were made for that. We were made for that.
Yes.
And it opened my heart to that. But I also was filled with joy that they found Christ. And that they found a welcoming Christ, and that had enriched their lives and brought peace and healing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's an excellent description of it. And I, again, for the sake of the podcast, I would just say anyone whether you're a parent of someone going through this or whether you're going through it yourself, no matter what age you are, that was my kind of like entryway into this whole world. Like you said, Roxanne, like this whole other colorful world that I had literally had no idea even existed. And here for the first time, I'm seeing people openly talk about their struggle with it, openly share some of the same exact questions and confusion and things about it that I had felt, but had really no idea how to even articulate it. So this documentary, and then just kind of through my research, I found another documentary that's a little bit more, I don't want to throw around the word clinical, but it's called The Third Way. And it's deals with the same exact subject matter, homosexuality in the Catholic Church. But it's got a little bit different approach. Father Mike Schmitz speaks in it. Chris Stefanik, a lot of these prominent Christian and Catholic figures are interviewed in it. But it's like, no one's heard of this. Like, why aren't we having, like, these are really great resources of just, even if they don't give us the answers we want, they're still offering people some sort of path, some sort of way out of that isolation to at least say, hey, I don't know the answers yet, but I'm struggling with this. And I just need to know that I'm not the only one. Like, I need to know that, what I'm feeling is not some abomination from the devil that's like going to eat me from the inside out. Like, it's not that. And the more that we can just honestly talk about these things, the more that I think we can just open up people to a happier, Christ-centered existence. And I don't want to sound like holy roller, because God knows how difficult this journey has been for me. And I just feel like in the last couple of years, I've reached a place where I'm kind of somewhat like content with where I am. But there's a few other elements that I can unpack, just in terms of, where I like to get to the question of where I believe this sexuality comes from, where I believe the culture has gotten it wrong, where I truly believe the church stands and shepherds to us. So I want to make sure that we get to all that, because I think
yes, and I'm going to give you time, Patrick. This is a topic that needs a little bit more nuance. So yeah, those are all good points, and I want you to make sure you cover them all. So
yeah, so I guess in terms of, if I may, unless you have other questions to steer it, getting into like the bigger, obvious elephant in the room of, was I born this way? No. I mean, again, there are much more informed professionals in this field, and there's a lot of I don't think it's as confusing as we have made it out to be. And I say we, just meaning humanity, because as humans, we don't want to admit that there may be things we don't have answers to, because that's scary, and it takes a lot of humility to be able to say, I don't have the perfect answer. And again, I've said it once, I'll say it a million times, I'm only an expert in my story. And a lot of these realizations I'm about to unpack are realizations I've only recently had in the last year or two, but they've become so profound for me because I've been able to kind of look back at my past experiences and at my childhood and things, and see over the years how those things have in a nurture versus nature way influenced kind of where I'm at now. So I guess to just give my spin on it, and then we can unpack it more, is something I've come to realize very recently in my life is we have got to culturally distinguish between the human being and the attraction. There's a very, very clear history that starts in, I think, Germany and Hungary back in the mid to late 19th century, of these terms, homosexual and heterosexual and gay and straight, were very, very much invented by these two men. I'll give you the names so you can link them later, but they weren't theologians, they weren't scientists, they were just journalists. They were just writers who they themselves experienced same-sex attraction, but in Germany, they were trying to combat these kind of like anti-sodomy laws, if I'm remembering correctly. And so in order to combat these laws, they came up with this vernacular to sow the attraction into the person's identity in order to kind of purvey that, well, they don't have a choice. They're born this way. And so that was kind of their honestly more political way of trying to combat these laws that they found were unjust. And, again, at the risk of sounding, I don't want to undermine how much care and compassion and love this topic needs to be addressed with, because it's again, the things that I'm saying are very cut and dry, but people's lives are not. People's lives are not black and white. People, and I'm a living example of that. Like, and I know so many people who feel the same way. So, but I think it's really important to look at the history of these things and how they were truly man-made. And now, unfortunately, it's become just this kind of like open shut case. Oh, I feel a little bit of an attraction to someone of the same sex. I'm gay, or I'm bi, or I'm pansexual. Like, these are all just labels, when in reality, even these very non-secular, non-Christian figures in history, even like Kinsey and Gore Vidal and these prominent figures in history, especially in Western history, who were not at all outspoken Christians, but they expressed their own reluctance to sew the gay identity in with the person and making gay a noun as opposed to an adjective. So I just say this because these are crucial points in our history of how we got to where we are. And where we are is just something that people just completely take for granted as, well, this is it. This is how culture discusses it. This is how it was meant to be. And I want to encourage people to separate yourself from the reality that surrounds you right now. Like, it's literally like red pill, blue pill, like Neo in the Matrix. Like, we have to remove ourselves from the Matrix and find our identities solely in how we were created, which we know to be in the image and likeness of God. The reason I say this is because gay, homosexual, those are man-made terms. Those are not definitive. I was born gay. I was born straight. I was born this, that, and the other. That is not how God creates us. That is not the way that, just because, again, we have these man-made terms. Man gets things wrong. Man gets things wrong all the time. And I truly do not believe we are living in a time in human history where we have the definitive answer to this issue. I don't know if we ever will. Even the Catholic Church is like, if you read the Catechism, and we can reference the exact kind of chapter and verse in the Catechism where it talks about human sexuality, but it even says like the origin of homosexual desires is still largely unknown. Yeah. But the people who experience them, like, we must avoid all hatred. We must avoid all negative actions and behaviors. They must be met with compassion and the utmost love, because that's just how we treat our fellow humans. And unfortunately, I don't want to get too political, but I think the emergence of identity politics has been the ultimate downfall, specifically of this issue, because it's very rare you can talk about homosexuality without lumping it into some politicized identity. Mm-hmm. And that's just not what humans are. Humans are not a political talking point. We're not, like, our identities were not meant to be created and, confused and just manipulated for political purposes. And so that's I'll take a break so you can,
Yeah.
if you have any questions, but
yeah, I do. So I did find the third way, and I actually wrote a column about it when it came out, and I was pounced on. Like,
oh, wow.
I mean, it was just like an immediate reaction. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. What do you, like, does she have any gay friends? Like, it just, there was a lot of, cause I write for a secular newspaper, and so it's interesting because one of my questions was going to be, and you helped me understand when you explained the words and how they're formed, and thank you for that. So interesting. But it's like, how do you break through that, that barrier there that automatically discounts you if you have any thoughts other than that that people were born this way?
Yeah, it's so hard. And I'm probably shooting myself in the foot because I'm probably going to get canceled after this comes out. But, but it's a conversation that is so worth having purely because there is so much confusion. Like, again, to the argument that sexuality is fluid. Well, it is. And so, like, that's why the argument that, like, you're born gay is just this kind of, like, paradoxical, kind of irrational way of thinking once you really break it down. And so,
can you explain what you mean by fluid there? Just so I make sure we know where we're at.
Yeah, I know. There are a lot of terms that have been kind of usurped and kind of bastardized by culture. So, so I think the way I understand it is, I shouldn't say sexuality as much as attractions. And so, again, I guess speaking from my experience, if I could just go a little bit into what I mean by that from my perspective, is what I've realized as I've gone deeper into my own reflections on my attractions and where they came from. I truly think the Lord has revealed a lot of truth to me through some of my worst experiences. And as I look back, especially at childhood, and a major realization, I actually at Eucharistic Congress last summer was a very, very, I think for many years I kind of just settled on, okay, this is just like my cross to bear. I'm just going to have to deal with it, and it'll be just, something I live with, but that's okay because we all have our crosses to bear. But at Congress was a really spiritually pivotal time for me because it opened my mind and my soul to the concept of healing. And the reason that's important for this issue is because when I look back at my experiences and the way that my experiences connect to my struggles with same-sex attraction, I look at my relationships with boys in my grade, my masculine relationships, my relationships with my brother, with my dad, and just this kind of profound insight that if you go listen to my friend Michael's episode, there's and again, I don't want to pretend to be an expert, but there and just in human development and child development, there are natural phases in a child's life where you're attached to your mother because you need her for food and for life. And then a little bit later on in young childhood development, I think around the age of 3 or 4, for boys, there becomes this, what should be natural kind of shift to attaching to dad kind of taking on this, again, this role of introducing us to more masculine concepts and more identifying with dad and what dad does. And for me, and for so many of us, I think that's in a perfect world, right? Like, again, we can look at these things scientifically and say, here is definitively what we know from science, from the data, how things should go. But again, in life, things don't go according to science. Like, things just don't go as black and white. So for whatever reason, for gay people, for straight, for anyone, and I use these terms just to speak to the world, those natural processes can be disrupted for any number of gazillion reasons. And for me, when I was younger, I remember having a lot of guy friends and mostly hung out with guys. I was really close with my cousin who's a female, but really it was when I got to middle school, I really started to see, which is normal, because that's like puberty time and, very confusing time in a young person's development. I started to notice the major differences between me and the other boys in my environment, like around me in my circles. And the bullying picked up, the name calling, the self-deprecation. And what I realized is that in my development, each time I was faced with an opportunity to kind of bond with a male in my circle, it was, instead of like a bond, it was met with, you're gay, you're a faggot, get away. And so I would naturally kind of gravitate towards female relationships because they were nicer to me. They were, they reminded me of that, again, mama's boy. They reminded me of that kind of like,
it was safer.
Safe. Yes. That, yes, exactly. And so as you can imagine, over 10, 15, 20 years, every single time I was met with a negative interaction with another male, it was like, I think of it as splitting a log in half with an axe. It's every instance was splitting not just my relationship with them, but my own perception of my own masculinity. And it was this complete separation of, okay, these boy, and again, I've only been able to articulate it in these last few months, the more I prayed on it and really learned more about myself. But each time that a boy could have accepted me, could have taken me into his circles, it was the opposite. It was, get away, you're different, you're not wanted here, you're weird. And so that would completely sever my own internal perception of my masculinity until the point where it just became, I'm not a man. I'm not a man at all. I don't even know how to be a man. I don't even know how to be with men in a healthy, intimate, non-sexual, intimate way. And it really, really disrupted my own development of my own sense of manhood and the role of a man. And of course, again, I'm not an expert in sexual development, but at some juncture along the line of my journey, that separation became this void and this need of masculine acceptance and masculine validation that I didn't have within myself. And it becomes sexualized. And now I start to, and when I see another man and body image and eating disorders, like that is also another big part of my own personal journey. And so anytime I see another man who I think, looks better than me, who kind of represents what looks like a strong masculine man, it becomes sexualized because it's something that I lack, or even, Roxanne, like, to be 100,000% honest, even loathe about myself, is that I never measured up. I'm not capable of being that person. I'm inadequate. Inadequacy and feeling unlovable. Those are two major things that I could spend another hour talking about. So I don't want to undervalue those struggles. But what it ultimately came down to was I was incapable of seeing myself as a man. And so this psychosexual desire turned into this this lust and this, but the main thing, and like you said earlier, you're spot on. It came down to just a desire, and not even a desire, but a need to feel loved. That's it.
Bingo, right there. Oh man, you just brought us, Patrick, like your insights here. You just went right into the core of it. And psychologically speaking, I think any of us can understand. Like, I'm a mother of 5 kids. I understand woundedness. I understand how wounds can affect someone their whole life, how their whole life, a trauma can live with them and in that way be fluid, right? That's the fluidity there, is that it can move in this direction or it can move over in this direction. And then when it goes over there, then it needs to add, it adds things. It's to make the case. I mean, we are so fragile and complex.
Yes.
And that's why this conversation needs to be 5 hours long, but it can't be. And I know we'll have to wrap it up, but you just did such a beautiful thing for us just now to bring us into that core in such an honest way. So thank you so much. And then before we have to wrap it up, because we will have to, how did the church then, like, because I know there's this perception out there that we're just the big bad wolf, you know,
totally.
And it's not at all. Obviously you wouldn't be there. Like, that is where you found solace, but it's a struggle. It's a journey. But share a little bit of the good stuff there, so that maybe people that have struggled can see that there is something beautiful. It might take a while, but it's there. It exists.
Yes, it absolutely does. And I think that's where, again, I mean, unfortunately, we are not just gonna get the answers handed to us by culture. Like, this is an issue where we really are going to have to do the honest, self-reflective, independent kind of research on our own, because CNN is not going to tell us what the Catholic Church truly believes about this issue. It's not going to be discussed in a mainstream way. So it is a little harder because just of the nature of how things are, especially in American society. Society, whatever. But my point being, I've seen so much beauty in sacrifice, and ultimately Christ calls us to self-sacrifice. And that's not unique to people struggling with same-sex attraction at all. We are all called. When you get married, marriage is a huge sacrifice of 2 individuals coming together. Like, there are all these variations in which God asks us to do the hard thing, and that's to not be of the world, but to be in the world. And these concepts of gay, of homosexual, of like these just terms and the lifestyle, those are things of the world, and we are meant to subscribe to God's reality. And if we do the honest soul searching, we'll see that God doesn't create gay people. He doesn't create straight people. He doesn't create pansexual people any more than he creates, any more than he creates people with other kinds of disordered attractions or behaviors. And so I think we get pummeled with all of this negativity to where, again, we just accept it as reality. But for me, I found so much beauty in the sacrifice. And it is, I think one thing we have to accept is that there is so much confusing but beautiful paradoxical truth in the church and the church's teaching. And I mean, again, that maybe we can do a part 2 that's 3 hours long in the future, but
I think so.
I think we need to be open to a truth that maybe we haven't discovered yet. And I can tell you that there's a lot of beauty within the church. And I guess I'll just end it by saying I firmly, truly believe with all of my heart and soul that God has a very, very, very special place in his heart for people struggling with same-sex attraction. I really believe that.
I mean, he's close to the brokenhearted and the suffering in a very, very tangible way, and a very close, tender way. So absolutely. And if we could just get through the rhetoric and have these honest, humble, real conversations, that's what I want. And you've provided that. And I'm so grateful for that. Patrick, I want to hear a little bit about you and what you're doing out there in LA. Are there any things that you can share with us about your life other than this topic?
Yeah. Contrary to popular belief, I am a human of society. I function, I get up and drink my coffee just like everyone else. No,
that's right.
I just last year got, right after Congress, actually, I got an amazing new job working for a Catholic media company where I'm working on some really exciting film and TV projects that hopefully the world will be introduced to in the next few months to a year. So those will be coming out, soon. And then I'm a screenwriter. I'm a writer. So I have a couple of, again, all in God's timing and God's beautiful, grace and mercy. He is really, it's been a really amazing year of blessings. And I'll just say I'm really, really close to a potential kind of dream scenario with one of my own independent creative projects. And God has really, really, really been in every step of that. So yes,
that's
more,
so
hopefully. Yeah, hopefully.
I don't know what you're talking about, but I can't wait to hear more.
I don't mean to be cryptic, but it's one of those things. I don't want to say too much before it's reality, because these things are so.
Yeah, we got to keep them tight to the chest. But just knowing your story, even and how hard won it was to get to the point of being able to live out your dream away from the farm that just didn't resonate with you, and just not everyone finds that. And it's exciting. God has some beautiful surprises in store for us, I think. And the more we follow him, the more grace comes. And he's just such a good God. I just am really grateful. So, well, Patrick, thank you so much. I'm going to add those couple of documentaries that you mentioned to the show notes. And I would highly encourage people looking at any of those, as well as the interview you mentioned with Lila Rose. Just so much to illuminate here and to better understand. And I think I agree. We need to take our time and be thoughtful and not just accept whatever is flying through the air. And to be compassionate, like you said, and being able to hear your story helps us do that. It helps humanize the story of so many. So thank you so much, Patrick. And we'll have to stay in touch for part 2. So
yes, I love.
All right. That. Yeah. God bless you. Have a great day.
God bless you too.
All righty. Bye-bye. Was I born this way? Obviously, we just scratched the surface here in answering the question to the full, but Patrick says no. He wasn't born with an inclination toward same-sex attraction. God didn't put a stamp on him indicating he was designed to carry this particular cross any more, as he said, than God assigned other disorders to his creations. As he was explaining that, a thought came to me that narrowed it down even more. God creates people, not disorders. While I know that many will argue that same-sex attraction is not a disorder, the church says that it is, and I believe the church to know more than I do about this and all issues, since she's been around some 2,025 years, and I'm only reaching toward 57 as of this recording. There was a time I really struggled with this and definitely needed to know more about it before I could be at peace. I'm still learning, thanks to people like Patrick who have discovered a third way, that being one can struggle with this cross and still live a satisfying life within the church. To be honest, the church's teachings on this topic were ultimately what drew me closer to her, because once I looked into what she says about same-sex attraction, and not what the world told me she said, I discovered something surprising: compassion, love, sensitivity, charity, and even understanding. A few more thoughts grabbed me in this interview with Patrick as I reviewed the conversation, and in particular, what he'd said about what helped form his inclination toward same-sex attraction. The first was the idea of what he called masculine validation. It seems to me that things in Patrick's life started to come into focus once he sensed validation from the true and eternal source, God. We each want that validation, and when we try to conform ourselves to the world rather than in our identity in God as beloved, things are certain to go off course in all kinds of ways. Ultimately, as Patrick said, it came down to a desire to feel loved, and that was it. That was the core of it all. We all desire to feel loved. We all seek validation. From whom is the question to ponder. This topic isn't something we should be scared of, embarrassed by, or scandalized by. People in our world struggle with same-sex attraction. People in our world struggle with eating disorders. People in our world struggle with addiction. None of those were sanctioned by God or in God's original plan for humanity. God is not a God of disorder or chaos, but a God of order and sanity. And the church can be a sanctuary for us as we grapple with the crosses each of us bears. Be kind to yourself and others in this journey, and remember, we all have places of brokenness, but those are the very places in which God can do his greatest work in us. As we head into June, we'll have several more related topics to discuss. Our next guest has designated June Fidelity Month as a way to unify us all, no matter race, religion, or creed. In that conversation, we'll ask a Princeton University professor who dwells in the world of academia, but with faith as a guide, does fidelity even matter? Until then, don't lose sight of the light.